What are the big misconceptions about the brain that people have gone through their life believing? I mean, that's one of them. Something that is true that kind of could fall in place of that is just this fundamental idea that our brains are plastic or sort of adaptable. Because when I found out that I could change my brain by what I do, I found that to be really, really inspiring.
Yes, that's exactly right. So brain plasticity, if someone hasn't heard that term before, it sounds like a weird term, but the reason it came about 100 years ago is because the great psychologist William James pointed out that, if you take a piece of plastic, what we like about that material that we call plastic is that you can mold it into a shape and it'll hold that shape. And that's what your brain does. So if I ask you the name of your third grade teacher, you can remember that name, even though it's been a long time, because your neural networks changed and held on to that piece of information. Okay, well, our whole lives, our brains are changing every moment. So now we have certain doors that close at different times. So just as an example, you need to learn language in the first several years of your life. If you don't learn language, you can never get the concept of language. Your brain will never figure that out.
You're not saying you can't learn a new language as an adult. You're saying the concept of language.
The concept of language, the concept that I can name things and I can ask for things and so on, just that never clicks in the brain. For example, in Romania at the fall of Ceausescu, there were tens of thousands of kids in the orphanages because their parents had been killed. It was too many kids. And so the staff there said, look, the kids will get, clingy if you pay too much attention to them. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to feed the kids, but we're not going to hold them or we're not going to talk to them. And all these children grew up with real cognitive deficits as a result. Here's the thing about brain plasticity. Human beings have a similar brain to all our neighbors in the animal kingdom. If you compare our brain to a horse brain, a dog brain, anything like that, it's the same general structures and stuff. But what we have is much more of the wrinkly outer bit called the cortex. It's the outer 3 millimeters. And maybe we'll come back to why that matters so much. But the other thing that Mother Nature tweaked with us, it's small genetic tweaks, but we have much more plasticity, adaptability, such that when a horse drops into the world, it's doing the same thing that horses did 100,000 years ago. It's just, eat, mate. But when a human drops in the world, we learn everything that's happened before us, and then we springboard off the top of that. So we, living in the 21st century, we say, oh, great, physics, math, this, that, art, blah, blah, great. We got everything that's happened before us. Now let's do our own thing. And that's what's so special about the plasticity of the human brain, the adaptability of it. The downside, the gamble, is that Mother Nature drops human brains into the world kind of half-baked. And we then get to absorb everything. But in the rare circumstance where you're not getting the right input, then that ends up really in trouble because it's only half-baked. So when it comes to language, we can learn multiple languages when we're young. That's very easy, but it gets harder and harder as that goes along. And various other things become harder. And here's why. It's because I mentioned this earlier, but the job of the brain is to make a model of the world so it can operate within it. So for example, you're an entrepreneur and you love doing business, so you get it. Okay, here's how here's how you structure business, here's how you hire well, here's how you set up a board well. You're doing everything because you've got a really rich internal model of how to structure a business. That's what the brain wants to do, is get that stuff right. As a result, if you suddenly ended up, taking a trip to Mars and there's a whole very different society there that does businesses very differently, you would have to relearn stuff really quickly. So here's the thing. You went from having a brain that had high fluid intelligence to now having a brain that has high crystallized intelligence. What that means is at the beginning, you can learn anything. You could learn any language. You could have dropped into any era. You could have dropped into 13th century Japan.
When I was young.
When you were young, when you were a baby, if you had dropped out of the womb in, 10th century Mongolia, you would have said like, okay, cool, learn language. You would be a 10th century Mongolian. But as it happens, you dropped into this era, a certain place and time and neighborhood and culture and family. And so you learn that. That's who you become, is that person. We often think that plasticity diminishes as you age, but it's not simply that it's diminishing. It's that you are getting the right answers about how to operate in the world. And so you don't have to change as much. Your brain doesn't require as much change.
What if I want to change?
Yes. So it turns out you still can change. That's the key, is that The reason brains change less and less is because they don't have to. But when things get upside down, just as one example, everything about the pandemic really stunk, except for one thing. I think the tiny silver lining is that all of us had to reassess, oh my gosh, wait, how is the world working? I thought I knew how the world worked, but now I don't know if there's going to be toilet paper at the store. I don't know if the bank's going to be open. I don't know if I can get coffee at the coffee shop. Like everything was different. As awful as it was, it's really useful to challenge your internal model of the world and get to do that as an adult. We don't usually get to.
So if I want to change, what would you recommend that I do? If I want to change who I am, say I'm stubborn, I'm not motivated, and I want to be a different person.
The key is challenge. The key is seeking challenge. So it turns out that where we always want to be is in between the levels of frustrating but achievable. And you want to take on new tasks. You want to seek novelty to find yourself in that zone and push yourself to do things that you just haven't done before. And one of the things that's so wonderful about the modern world, everyone's got complaints about the internet and social media and stuff like that, but the good news is it exposes you to so much more than you ever even knew was out there. The key is to actively seek those challenges and seek new things and seek to become expert in various sorts of fields. And I think the key is that once you become good at something, you have to drop that and take on something you're not good at. This is the best thing that you can do for your brain. The reason is because what you're doing is you're constantly building new roadways and pathways in the brain. There's a study that's been going on for decades now called the Religious Orders Study, where a bunch of Catholic nuns agreed to donate their brains for autopsy when they passed away. What the researchers discovered when they look at the brain carefully is that some fraction of these nuns had Alzheimer's disease. Their brains were physically degenerating with the ravages of this dementia. But they didn't show any of the cognitive deficits that one normally has. They didn't seem to be having memory problems and so on. It turns out it's because all these nuns lived in these convents till the day they died. They had social challenges and they had fights with their fellow sisters and they played games with their fellow sisters and they had chores and responsibilities and they were doing stuff. What that means is even as the brain tissue was physically degenerating, they were making new roadways and bridges all the time. And so that's what kept them cognitively healthy. We call that cognitive reserve. Contrast this with people who retire at 65 and they go home and they watch television and their social circles shrink and so on. That's when you've really got concerns because you're not building the new pathways.
Is there data to support that when you retire, if you retire early, or if you retire, say, in your 60s, it increases your probability of an earlier death or cognitive decline?
Almost certainly with cognitive decline, because you're just not getting the challenge. At that point, you're just coasting on your internal model. It's tragic, but what happens often is that people's hearing gets worse. And so by the time they retire, let's say in their mid-60s, it's not really that fun for them to go out to parties and restaurants anymore because they can't quite hear. And so there are all these converging reasons why their social lives shrink. But it turns out social life is one of the most important things that we can do for our brains because there's an expression we sometimes use in neuroscience, which is that nothing is as hard for the brain as other people, because you never know what the other person's going to say and do and how they'll react emotionally and so on. So you're constantly on your toes with other people. And if you're not doing that anymore, that ends up being a problem.
Interesting. And I'm 33 years old. So if you were to plot where my brain is on like a graph of decline, is it the case that I should be doing as much as I can now to build as many pathways as I can so that when I'm 80, my decline sort of levels out in a better place?
Oh, yeah. For sure. But this is true for many reasons, actually. Okay, so the truth is your brain peaked at the age of 2, because that's when you get the most connections between neurons, between these cells in the brain. You get this, at first you're born with these 86 billion neurons and they connect and connect and connect, and it finally becomes like a overgrown garden at the age of 2. And from there you're pruning, from there you're taking connections away. Now it happens that that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing because that's how you're resonating with the world that you are in. Mm-hmm. 21st century London and LA versus, 10th century Mongolia, because you're just strengthening those pathways that resonate and you're getting rid of everything else. Okay, fine. But over time, your brain cells die. Every time you hit your head on something or whatever, your brain cells are going down. So in that sense, you've peaked. But your crystallized intelligence that you've been building your whole life, that keeps going, and you'll have decades ahead of you where you can start doing stuff. But yes, the reason to learn everything you can is because all that stuff cashes out at various points in your life. When you're starting your next business, or you're, wanting to do the next great thing where you're surfing the web of AI, you'll say, oh, I learned this thing when I was 16. I learned this thing when I was 22. And these are paying off now.
I think I heard Andrew Huberman say that one of the most fascinating discoveries of the last century is a particular part of the brain called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. And it links to what you were saying a second ago about challenge and doing things that are difficult.
Yeah. It turns out that area of the brain is involved, and other networks as well, because when you're doing something new and challenging and difficult, you have stress and anxiety. Your whole brain is active. Let's say I measured your brain, even with something like EEG, electroencephalography. That's where I stick electrodes on the outside. Let's say I measure your brain and my brain. We're doing something that, let's say you're an expert at. What's something you're really good at? Juggling?
Oh,
I don't know.
Gosh.
Some physics.
Let's go for juggling.
Okay. Let's say you're an expert juggler. Let's say I've never juggled. Okay. If we're both juggling, you're going to be much better than I am, but your brain will be less active. You won't have as much activity in your brain. My brain is on fire with activity because why? I'm trying to figure out, okay, where do I put my hand? How do I throw this? And blah, blah, blah. So when I'm a novice at something, my brain is using much more activity, not just the anterior mid-cingulate, but tons of activity all over because I'm trying to figure out the rules. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. You as an expert, you got it. You don't need to burn much activity. This is what the brain's goal is to say, hey, once I've practiced something a lot, once I get something about the world, I'm going to burn it deeper and deeper into the circuitry so I don't have to burn a lot of energy on it.
On this part of the brain, the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, Andrew Huberman was saying it's larger in people that do things that they basically don't want to do, hard things. If you spend your life doing things you don't want to do, then it happens to be bigger. And so people have now thought of this part of the brain almost like the willpower muscle, because for some reason, those that are doing hard things have bigger ones and those that are not have smaller ones.
I mean, it wouldn't be so much the willpower muscle. It would be some indication retrospectively of how hard you have worked. Look, the fact is you can see changes in brain size with lots of things. I'll give you an example. If you are a pianist, if you play piano, then we can actually see physical changes in your motor cortex. This is the part of the brain essentially underneath where you would wear headphones. For those who are looking visually, it's this red part here. You actually get a bigger loop of tissue here than you do in a normal brain. Why? Because you're doing so much fine motor activity with your fingers, with both hands. Okay. In contrast, if you're a violinist, you're only really doing that kind of detailed activity with one hand. The other hand is just bowing. And so you only get that activity here in one half of the brain for violinists. So I can look at a brain and tell, hey, is the person a pianist or a violinist or neither? I can tell just by looking at the visual cortex because you see changes in the brain based on what you do. For example, jugglers, people who play music, even you can tell this with medical students who study for final exams, you actually see changes in the distribution of their cortex.
Why would it be getting bigger?
The reason is the brain's devoting more real estate to that. In this case, let's say we're talking about fingers on a piano or a violin. The brain is devoting more, there's more relevance to that. And so more real estate.
So that you can do it better in the future?
Exactly. The key about the cortex, this wrinkly outer part, is that it is a one-trick pony. This is often overlooked because even this brain that I'm holding here is color-coded so that we think, oh, okay, that's clearly labeled this, that's clearly labeled that, and so on. But in fact, it's all the same stuff and it can change. So for instance, if you are born blind, then this area that we normally call the visual cortex gets taken over by the rest of the brain. If you're born deaf, then this part that we call the auditory cortex gets taken over. It gets devoted to other tasks. And so this whole system is very, very fluid. And this is what fascinates me about brain plasticity, is the way that we can be the sculptors of our own brains, because we can devote ourselves to particular things and have the brain's real estate get involved in that.
So if I was currently someone that couldn't get out of bed, I didn't have a lot of discipline or motivation, and I wasn't very good at committing myself to hard things, with everything you know about the brain, is it possible to take a set of actions that will fundamentally change my brain and make me that type of person who runs marathons, who does hard things, who's motivated and disciplined, and who has high agency and attacks the world?
Yes. Yeah. But it's much more than simply resolve, because, I mean, just look at New Year's resolutions. By February, most people have dropped most of them. So it's really a psychology problem about figuring out, okay, what are the things that motivate me? So let's say you want to become a marathon runner. You've got that distant dream. You figure out, like, what actually motivates me in the short term? Who am I trying to impress? What am I trying to accomplish in my life? How can I structure things like this Ulysses contract that I talked about earlier, where I'm actually locking myself into a contract? Like, I call Bob and I say, I will meet you every morning at 7 and we're going to run until we drop. Like, once I've committed to those sorts of things, that's how you set things up so that you do the right thing.
But it's a bit of a cycle, right? Because then my brain will adapt, and then presumably that'll make it easier for me to run.
Yeah.
And then I'll run more, and then my brain will adapt.
That's right.
And the cycle continues.
And it's not just your brain, of course. In this case, it's your body. You're getting better, you're getting stronger, you don't get as out of breath. And so all these things help, exactly. But in order to keep the cycle going, you need to figure out what is spinning this flywheel and what are all the other things in your life, whether good motivations or bad. It doesn't matter. You just figure out what it is that you can do to get there.
Are there some physical exercises that are particularly good for the brain from what you've understood?
The general story is exercise is really important for the brain. I'll give you just one example of that, which is there's still this debate going on about whether we get new neurons in the brain. The general story has always been you're born with 86 billion neurons and those slowly die with time. But in rats, for example, there is a little trickle of new cells, new brain cells, and there's been a debate for a long time about whether that little trickle happens in humans or not. Still unresolved, but in rats, what you can see is that exercise causes the trickle to increase. If you stick the rat on the wheel and it's doing physical exercise, you get more new brain cells. Now, we don't know for sure that this happens in humans, but lots of things about physical fitness and exercise matter a lot to the brain. This is nothing new. Exercise, sleep, diet, these are really important things for keeping the health of this organ.
Is there anything else that's important to know for someone that is trying to change and improve and keep their brain in a healthy state as they age that we haven't touched on?
There is something that all of us are thinking about, which is about social media and the internet in general. I do think one of the interesting things about the internet and social media is that if we were growing up in a village 500 years ago, you just know the people in the village and what they can do and so on. But let's say no one in the village was an entrepreneur or a neuroscientist. And so we can't even picture that as a thing. We don't know anything about that. One thing that the internet has done for kids growing up in the digital age is that you get a lot more exposure to things. You have so much more exposure. And I actually think this is one of the positive things that I would say about social media is that you not only get exposure, wow, that kind of thing is possible and that kind of thing is possible, but you also have people teaching you how to get there. Mm-hmm. They say like, hey, I'm a fitness influencer and I'm going to show you exactly how to do the thing. Or, you say, hey, here's exactly how you start a business. Or I say, hey, here's the route that you go through undergrad and grad school to become a neuroscientist. And that's great. I mean, there's so much more of a talent window now that everyone gets exposed to. So I think that makes a better brain.
What are we doing to our children that you think we probably shouldn't be doing as it relates to brain development?
Here's the thing that's really important about this debate is that nobody really knows, and I'll tell you why. It's because to do anything in science, when you're saying something about a group, you need to have a control group that you're comparing against. And when it comes to asking the question of, hey, kids growing up now with social media or the internet, how do they compare to other brains of kids who don't grow up with that? Well, we don't have a control group unless you look at kids who are incredibly impoverished or let's say Quakers who don't believe in technology. And with both those groups, there's 100 other important differences. So you can't just say, oh, look, I'm comparing to this kid who grew up without food, and I'm going to say there's this difference. Who the heck knows why the difference is there? Even a generation ago, there's so many differences in terms of diet and pollution and politics and blah, 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 like everything that you can't do it. So I only mention this because I think it's very important. A lot of people pipe off with things about, oh, the younger generation, their brain, this, that, but we don't actually know. And I will tell you that I happen to be a cyber optimist on this point about what growing up with the internet does for young people. I think it's going to make them much smarter than the generation that came before. And here's why. It has to do with the size of the intellectual diet that they can bring in. So when I was a kid, I grew up pre-internet. I wanted to know stuff, so my mom would drive me to the library, which was 25 minutes away, and I would pick up the Encyclopedia Britannica, and I would flip through it and hope they had an article about the thing that I wanted to know about. And that's how I was able to get my little straw of knowledge. But now, kids are growing up with access to anything they're interested in, and this is so good for the brain. And from a plasticity point of view, the reason this matters is because change happens in the brain when you are curious about something. So when a kid asks a question to Alexa or Siri or whatever, and they get the answer, that sticks because they have the right cocktail of chemicals going on in their head. In contrast, when I grew up, I learned tons of just-in-case knowledge. I mean, that's all that the teachers could teach us is just in case you ever need to know this fact, here it is. But kids are in a really great situation now. So there are pros and cons to all this stuff, but I think I'm very optimistic about what this means for the warehouse of knowledge that kids can build up now. And by the way, I saw an interview with Isaac Asimov in 1988. He was the great science fiction writer who wrote Foundation and so many other books. And he was saying on the show in 1988, he said, look, I envision a day when there will be one central supercomputer and every house will have a cable running to that supercomputer. And you can ask any question you want and it knows the entirety of humankind's knowledge on that computer. What he was foreseeing here was the internet. He got the details wrong, but it doesn't matter. But the idea is he saw how this would be so incredible for education because he pointed out, look, in any classroom, it's going too fast for half the kids, too slow for the other half of the kids. And if you could just pursue the sphere of humankind's knowledge, if you could enter in whatever door you wanted to, that's the way to do it because you'll be motivated. Now, he wasn't talking about brain plasticity or anything, but this is exactly what I'm saying from a brain plasticity point of view. It really matters. I'll just mention something, which is a lot of people are concerned that, with AI, we're going to get lazy. We won't, know how to do anything anymore because we can outsource it. It just so happens that I love doing home improvement. I'm always fixing my house. I have 3x'd myself in the last half year because of AI. Because I take a picture of something, I say, hey, I've never seen this kind of thing before. How does this work? Whatever. And ChatGPT says, oh, you do this and you take this out and here's the bolt and blah, blah. It's not me outsourcing it. It's me being curious about something. And so I remember how to do everything now. I know how to do much more than I used to because I like it.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously. And the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.